Welcome to Latent Treasures, a uniquely uplifting podcast filled with inspiring guests to brighten your week. Our show takes inspiration from a lesser-known quote from C.S. Lewis. What we want is not more little books about Christianity, but more little books by Christians on other subjects, with their Christianity latent. While I love books, this is 2020. And let's face it, audio is a lot easier to produce. But you are more than welcome to think of our little podcast as a bunch of little books about various topics, lived by ordinary people. But these people are quite extraordinary in the way their faith drives them and fuels their journey. Journeys on which they're making profound impacts on everyone around them. We hope you'll be blessed by these stories and recognize that inside each of us is the ability to be similarly extraordinary. If you like our show, please subscribe. And if you find any individual show special, please like it and share it freely. Cheyenne Summers may be a familiar name to our listeners because she has been partnered with us since day one, providing our cover art. We chose her art both because it is filled with great emotion and feeling, and because she's a wonderful example of a former foster youth who has risen above the circumstances she faced her entire childhood, and who is transforming not only her own family's life, but inspiring and transforming the lives of others who, like she previously lived, are now challenged with truly difficult times. We are so happy she spent time with us this week and shared her story. She provides insight into the mind of a foster child, as she was one almost her entire childhood. She uncovers what it's like to have a fully dependent adult sibling, tells us why so many of her childhood friends had no idea of her circumstances, shares her experiences with mental burnout, what flags to watch for, and how to possibly mitigate burnout, a lesson I know many people here in 2020 are struggling to figure out, and more. Her accomplishments professionally are already stacking up, and her future is indeed bright. But if you'd like to support her and her family now, which you may be well motivated to do after hearing her story, remember that her art is available for sale, linked in our full show notes on bethechurch.org, and she'd love to have you explore her work posted on her Etsy page, or even be contacted for a new commission if she can retain creative direction. We hope you enjoy this episode. It is raw. There are some sensitive topics discussed that may not be ideal for younger audiences to hear, so please use discretion in listening and who might be able to hear the broadcast. In my opinion, though I'm no official, I'd consider this conversation to be PG-13 at times. But now, without further ado, please enjoy our time with Cheyenne Summers. Today we are fortunate to have Cheyenne Summers with us. Cheyenne, as many of you have probably recognized the name of, has been our art contributor since day one of our podcast, and we thank you so much for sharing your awesome art for our covers of the podcast. But we wanted to get her story out to everyone as well, because it's amazing, and I want to dive into it, and I'll kind of let her tell the bulk of the story, and I'll just kind of steer the ship a little bit with some questions. But welcome, Cheyenne. Thank you so much for taking time today to join us.
Of course.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Like I said, I knew a bit about your story originally, and essentially wanted to make sure that because we focus so many of our shows are focused on the foster care community and how to be supportive to it, aware of it, share awareness of it, etc. I thought it would be great to have you share from the inside what your experiences were like inside of it, what it's like psychologically as the child going through it, etc. And I'll let you kind of divulge some of the layers of that. But if you wouldn't mind, let's start with kind of the background of, going back to early age, being born, your family situation, what How long was it? What brought you into the or exposed you to the foster care system to begin with?
Okay. I was born in Burbank, Northridge area, and both of my parents were um, meth addicts. And um, my father was a habitual user, and my mother was more of a binger. She would go 3 months as a normal person of society, and then she would binge for 2 weeks. And that was her way of coping with some prior trauma that she had and some stress. And my father also had massive amounts of trauma that he used the drugs to cope with.
Okay. Now,
Um,
did that affect either of you via birth? As far as like, did you guys were you born into an addiction or anything, or were you free from that?
I was born premature at 6 months gestationally,
Oh wow.
so I was a very tiny baby. And then my mother immediately got pregnant again with my sister, who was a C-section, I believe. Um, and we were both born like, normal faculties. We weren't disabled or anything, but my sister unfortunately became disabled later on because one night while my mother was at work, my father was on meth and he couldn't stand her crying. So he picked her up and he shook her and he threw her down, which was shaken baby syndrome and caused severe amounts of bleeding in the brain and basically turned her into a vegetative state. Currently, she's a 27-year-old woman with the mind of a 6-month-old baby and needs 24-hour constant care, feeding and changing. She can't walk, she can't talk. Um, None of the normal things that we would hope for our children.
Yeah.
Um, so he went to jail when I was about a year and a half, too, and we entered the foster care system for the first time. Um,
Wow.
we were separated because my sister required a higher level of care. And I remember going like brief flashes of each home, like going in and out of each home, never staying longer for more than a couple of weeks. Um, Eventually, my mother was able to get us back, but she was still using. She had a new boyfriend, and this boyfriend was physically and emotionally abusive.
Wow. So when she got you
Um,
back, you were still young childhood.
yes, I was about 3 or 4 years old
Okay.
when we returned to her, and um,
And so the
she
memories from that first stint before she got you back. I mean, I know my memories from early childhood are minimal at best. Are when you're going through something like that, do they tend to create deeper, harder memories, or are they still like a lot of people looking back to their early childhood that they barely remember anything?
trauma seems to make memories sharper in the mind because it draws upon our survival instinct and like, hey, you need to remember this because this could help you survive. So definitely, I still have memories of most of the homes, of the faces of the people that I was being taken care of interactions with their children, even,
Yeah.
um, and just like snatches and moments of each home. Um, and uh, I remember that I forgot I had a sister for a while. It wasn't until our mom got us back that I was like, oh, yeah, you exist. uh,
Wow.
and I became very protective of her um, because of the physical and emotional abuse of her new boyfriend. Um, and my mom continued to binge. Like, I would come home from school and not know if she was going to be home. I would, you know, go to school in the morning and wonder if she was going to be there when I got back. Um, and I had tried to tell my teachers what was going on, but um, both my mom and her boyfriend were able to explain it away as just like I was lying, as a 5-year-old who was lying. And um, she was binging for a while, and whenever she would leave, her boyfriend would call up CPS and tell them to come pick us up because we weren't his kids and we were trash, and they would have me pack up all of my clothes into trash bags, tell me I couldn't take any of my toys, and we would be carted off somewhere. And so it was a lot of back and forth for a while, and a lot of instability, and just uh, feeling like I didn't matter, one, but also in the brief interactions that I had with my mother, where I would beg her to stop doing her drugs, feeling like her addiction was more important than us. Um, there was one memory in particular where we had just found her after 2 weeks, and her boyfriend jumps through the window of the van and starts beating the shit out of her. And uh, my sister starts like screaming and crying in the back of the car, and I'm trying to quiet her down at like 5 years old because I'm afraid that if I don't keep her quiet, he's going to come and beat the shit out of us. And um, we stop at a gas station on the way home, and I beg my mom, like, throw away the pipe, please stop doing drugs. See, at 5 years old, please, please, like, please stop this. And she says, I threw it away, I'm not doing it again. And we get home, and she immediately goes to the stove to smoke the last of the meth that she had.
Yeah.
And it was those one of those jarring moments where it was like, your addiction means more to you than us. And that means I don't need to care about you anymore because I need to care about myself. And for a 5-year-old to come to that conclusion is particularly jarring.
Yeah, exactly.
Eventually, she got arrested because she led the police on a high speed chase while on meth and flipped over a cop car with the officer inside. And my sister and I were taken into the system permanently. And her former boss, who, she was in her mid 50s, old school Italian Catholic woman, and her husband, who, grew up in the Midwest on a farm, also in his mid 50s and Catholic, heard what was happening and decided to keep my sister and I together and to take us in as their own at 6 years old. I
6.
was
Okay.
6 at the time.
Wow. So if we could pause right there for a sec. What memories you have from, year old going into the system and being cared for by this revolving door of caregivers and foster families, and then getting to go back with your mom and the memories you have of the time with your mom. Out of curiosity, do you remember, or based on your memories, would you say one or the other of those two experiences or phases of life was better than the other? Because it almost sounds like,
Um,
despite the revolving door, that might have been easier to deal with than your your parents or your mom and her new boyfriend's like meth abuse.
it was easier in a sense that I knew I wasn't going to be around my mom and her boyfriend, but harder in the sense of they never kept you for more than a couple weeks. You never knew where you were going to be. What's wrong with me? Why can't you keep me for longer? Uh, and are these people going to throw me away too? Are these people going to keep me? Am I worth keeping? Are these people going to hurt me the way my parents did, or are they safe? Like, there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety that comes with a
Yeah.
revolving door of caregivers,
Was
no
there a
matter how
reason
well
that you're
intentioned
aware of
they
that
are.
the revolving door was so bad?
I have no idea. I
Okay.
was too young.
Yeah.
And of course, as a kid, you internalize that and you think, well, it must be because there's something wrong with me.
Right.
Like, maybe that's why my parents are addicts. Maybe that's why none of these people want to keep me, because there's something wrong. I
Yeah.
must be a bad kid.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interject, but I was just curious if that memory, which felt like, and it makes sense that they felt different in each way. Okay, so
Mhm.
then your mom's boss steps in. They decide to keep you and your sister together, which is tremendous considering her condition. Um,
Yeah.
and sorry, pick up from there.
It sounds like it would be a happily ever after, but they had their own two autistic sons who had disabilities, and If anybody listening knows about youth with autism, it's that extreme changes within their dynamic causes them to physically lash out. So there was a time where I was enduring physical abuse from my autistic brothers. Um,
So they were a
and
little bit
so it
older
was like,
than you?
well, they were 15 years older than me,
Okay.
but mentally they were about the same age as me. Um, and it was like, well, this is better than what we were enduring, and at least my sister and I are together, and there's no drugs in the house. But at the same time, I'm being beat up on by these two older boys who are much stronger than me. Um, but we had stability for 6 years. We had a stable home. I knew where I was going to school. I knew who was taking care of us. I knew that my sister was being cared for. Um, they could never officially adopt us because my father claimed Cherokee ancestry, and their lawyer told them, if you try to adopt these kids, the mother tribe will take them if they are indeed Native American. Um, so I was content with just having a stable place for a while. Um, and then, they became builder developers. And at 12 years old, they sold their house when I was 12 in 2008. Um, and that was the height of the market, and the bubble burst right after they sold their house. And uh, they lost everything. They lost everything. And we went from having a stable home to living in trailers, to living in unfinished sections of homes with like the tarp over it. And then when the rains came, like mold grew all over everything. We lived without electricity, without running water, with rats. Um, and all of that was just like, I accepted it as, you know what, this is my life, this is normal, this is better than where I came from, because at least we were all together. They kept us kids. They never once said, we're going to send you back to the system. Um, and they kept us together. And that was the biggest lesson they ever gave me about commitment to your responsibilities and to your family. Is through all that, they kept two kids that weren't even theirs.
Yeah.
Um,
So, one, as the older brothers they had to eventually get used to your presence, right? So that wasn't, I understand, dramatic change to their environment
yeah,
at first. Did the abuse resolve over time too? Did they stop?
for the most part.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
And I'm
for the
just
most part.
curious if you could touch on a little bit or paint the picture a little bit about, um, certainly understand the background of what's going on with, you're now permanent foster family, and they clearly have this big heart for you guys despite the difficulties. Tell me a little bit about them as just as people, as you observe them as your parents. It sounds like they did their very best, but I don't want to assume anything. So I don't know if you want to spend a little bit of time kind of telling us about their qualities and character.
Okay. It was very much a matriarchal household. My mom was a old school Italian. Her parents had come, off the boat from Italy, uh, and uh, there might have also been mafia ties there. There was a great amount of abuse at the hands of her parents to her because she was the firstborn and she was not a boy. And in an Italian family, the firstborn always has to be a boy. So she was, she knew that feeling of never being good enough. She knew about abuse and being physically, emotionally, and sexually abused as a child. And she had her own trauma, but I think she did her best to overcome it. A little of it bled over into how she raised us. She was very strict. Corporal punishment was indeed a thing, but it was never like abuse, like beating up on us for the sake of beating up on us because she's angry. It was always, there was a point to the punishment. Um, and it was always to make sure that we were responsible, respectful, and that we were well behaved children. Um, so she grew up, in Burbank, and she was a working woman in a time where women working was a new thing. And she had a brilliant mind that I think if she had been born a little bit later would have been put to better use. My dad was um, born, he grew up on a farm, and most of his family was from the Midwest. Um, and I feel like because I was raised by that older generation, because they were in their mid 50s when I was 6, uh, I gleaned a lot of that older wisdom from like the golden era, and the wit and the humor that most of my peers were deprived of. So in addition to, enduring all of this abuse and having all of this trauma, I also had, you know, the social skills and wit and humor of the previous generation. So most of my peers just, I didn't have a lot of friends. But I did have a lot of good wisdom from them. So uh, my foster mom would always preach respect and responsibility, and that was like her mantra to us. She taught me how to cook things from scratch. My dad was very frugal because he grew up on a farm, and he taught me how to budget. Um, my mom taught me how to sew and how to be a good caretaker for my sister, which as an adult, became very important. Um, and it was just like, you don't buy something new if it's broken, you fix it until it can't be fixed anymore. And um, it's very different from this age of like single use and planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
Um, Essentially, they raised me for a world that no longer exists.
Well,
um,
well,
but
certainly
it
in
was,
California, it's an abnormality or an anomaly, right? There are certainly plenty of places where that's practiced a lot more, but it is definitely rare in California. What part of the Midwest did he come from?
most of his family was from Oklahoma and Texas.
Okay.
So big farming communities, and basically, unlike my peers who, if they weren't in school, they were hanging out with friends. If I wasn't in school, I was doing chores, doing homework, or later on when I became a teenager, I was working. I didn't have the luxury of going and hanging out with peers growing up. That was frowned upon. And if the occasional, hey, can I go to the movies with my friends came up, it was, okay, you're going to clean the whole house and do all the yard work before you can even go do that. So it was something you really had to work for.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's a great picture. Thank you for kind of enlightening us there. After, so you'd been kind of really going through a rough phase after the crash of '08. Where did
Mhm.
things go from there?
Well, they had sold their house and bought a property in Somas, and they were trying to build on that property. And because of the economic crash, they ran into a few difficulties. So at first, we had all 6 of us living in a toy hauler, which is smaller than most apartments. Um, and uh, we had a generator for electricity, and we would have to refill the gray water. And then the HOA there did not like the trailer on the property and made us remove it, but we had nowhere else to live. So we started living in the unfinished sections of the home that had the plastic sheeting on it. And when the rains came that year, everything developed black mold. So I remember at 12, 13 years old going in with my dad in the full cover suit with the weed sprayers full of bleach and bleaching the entire units so that we could continue to live in them. Um, we had no generator for electricity. We had no running water. I would have to go to the top of the hill to fill up a bucket of water and bring it down and heat it up on a little Bunsen burner so that we could step inside one of those plastic tubs and take a bath every day. And I would have to get myself and my sister ready before we went to school. And then I would have to walk to the bus stop. And if I missed the bus, I was walking to school. They didn't believe in like, oh, you missed the bus, let me drive you to school. It's nope, you made a mistake, you fix it.
Yeah.
So
Goodness.
Very no nonsense household, very structured. Uh, we had rats move into the units at times. I remember we had a German Shepherd at the time, and I would team up with the dog to hunt the rats out of the unit. And like I would make a whole bunch of noise, and then they would go scurrying toward him, and he would just get them. And now it's like I'm like, no, the rats, because I love animals. But at the time, it was I have a sister who has no immune system, and we have rats living in our things and chewing at my books and chewing at my clothes. We need to get rid of them. It was just like a practicality.
Absolutely.
Um, and from the time I was 12 until I was 15, 16, that was our life. And I didn't talk about any of it with my friends at school. None of my friends knew what was going on until much later when I was an adult and decided to tell them, like, yeah, actually, when you guys were going out to the movies and hanging out, like, this was my life. And
And
it shocked
there's
a
a
lot of
reason,
them.
there's a logical reason partly to that. Do you want to
Yes.
share what that was?
I was afraid that if I told anyone what was happening, that we would be taken away. I knew as a teenager that they take away kids just because their parents are drug addicts and abusing them. What about if they're homeless? Like, we're still wards of the state. If CPS found out that we had no stable home, they would probably take us away. And I trusted this family not only to keep us, but to take good care of my sister and I as best as they could. We weren't being abused. There was no drugs in the house. There was some emotional abuse from my mother, but that's because she was very strict and no nonsense. And I I couldn't imagine a better place for any of us than in the care of these people. And I didn't want to risk screwing it all up.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you got through it in the long run. You guys started to get back on your feet.
Yes. Around the time I turned 16, my my mother um, decided that even though she loved my father, she was no longer in love with him, and she started dating someone else. My mom and dad were still married because they were Catholics and they didn't believe in divorce. So the family stayed together, but she was also dating this other person. And it was kind of a polyamorous lifestyle. But this other person was willing to put his name onto a rental home for our family. And they hadn't been able to do that previously because they had declared bankruptcy and nobody would rent to them. Um, and so there was no resentment or upset or anger on my part toward my mom and her new boyfriend, because it's like, hey, you just gave us a home to live in.
Yeah.
I'm a-okay. And it caused a lot of emotional turmoil and strain within the household, um, both on my father's part, on the part of my brothers, who, as autistics, any major changes upset them a lot. And they had been through a lot in the past 6 some odd years with all of the turmoil of being homeless and losing everything, and having our stuff eaten by rats and just destroyed. So uh, it took a long time for everything to settle down and heal with our family. Um, but through all of that, they kept us and they
Yeah.
loved us as their own. So I have no complaints.
That's
Um,
incredible. Did things continue in that way for a while?
they did. And at 16, I knew I was going to be going to college and moving out on my own because I was rabidly independent. That's the way my parents had raised us. So it came as no surprise. And my foster father had told me, I know you're going to be going out and being an adult. I don't want you to worry about taking care of your sister while you're building your own stability. So we'll keep her here with us. And I started to volunteer with a nonprofit called Women of Substance and Men of Honor. And the president of the organization, Rosalind Event, really helped me um, work through a lot of my trauma, a lot of my abuse, my PTSD that I had, anxiety, depression. She helped me with school resources and scholarships and job resources and how to interview and how to do a resume and interview clothes and hygiene packages and housing assistance, and helped me know like what was available to me and what resources I could utilize as a foster getting out of the system and becoming an adult. Um, and I credit a lot of my success and stability to her and to her organization, because without that, I would have sunk. I would have floundered. I didn't have, parents who would pay for college for me or buy a car for me. I was walking everywhere. I was taking the bus when I needed to. I was working full time, going to school full time, and just trying to make it.
Yeah.
And um, they helped me a lot, but they also helped me by allowing me to be a mentor and volunteer there, because it opened my eyes to the many different stories of the foster kids in the system. And it makes you feel less alone. Because prior to that, I had only met one other foster kid in high school, and he's my best friend now. Um, and I didn't know anybody's story. I didn't know that other people had gone through similar things or even worse things than I'd been through. Um, I had kind of sequestered myself in my own little bubble, working, going to school, taking care of family, reading. Reading became a really big coping mechanism for me, because it allows you to escape for a bit. Um, Art and writing as well.
Yeah.
So it I was able to see the stories of these other youth and support them and help them and give back. Um, and that was also really powerful for me.
Yeah.
And I continue to help that organization to this day. I'm on the advisory board, and I'm helping all of the youth whenever I can.
That's
But
awesome. So when you were leaving, when you graduated young, which is awesome. You obviously poured yourself into your academics quite a bit and earned your way into your college pursuits. Did you know right away, even as you were transitioning there, what you wanted to pursue?
I didn't. I didn't have anybody guiding me, really. I took like a career assessment, and because I was so well read and so interested in everything, it didn't really narrow anything down for me.
I know how
Because
you
it's like,
feel.
oh,
Yep.
you could be an engineer, you could be an artist, or you could be a biologist. And I'm like, that doesn't help me.
Yeah. Thank you for opening every
So I
door.
started with art because I was, yeah, I was really good at math. I was really good at reading, but I wasn't so good at art because it was abstract and conceptual. And so I wanted to challenge. And I completed an art degree, and it actually became a really strong coping mechanism for me, um, on dealing and healing with my trauma. And I was able to a art as healing class with a probation. So I very strongly believe in using like the arts as like a coping mechanism for healing with whatever you're going through.
Yeah.
Um, and I finished my degree, um, but it was not without its obstacles. Halfway through, once I graduated with my associates and I was transferring to CSUN, I got pregnant with my boyfriend of 4 years. Um, was not planned. I was on birth control, got pregnant anyway. Um, and I had a lot of turmoil about should I get an abortion? Should I keep it? I never wanted to be a mom because I spent my whole life knowing how much responsibility was. I talked to my mentor, and she said, and it might not eat at you now, but 5 years from now, it will haunt you for the rest of your life. And so I kept the baby, and there was a lot of anxiety and reliving of trauma, and like, am I going to be like my mom? Am I going to be good enough? Um, sort of situations happening. And then I had the child, and 3 months after I had my baby, uh, my foster mother divulged to me that she had stage 4 breast cancer and that it was turning into necrosis. And she refused to see a doctor because she was terrified of doctors. So I went to visit her for the first time since I had gotten pregnant. And it was the most surreal moment I have ever had in my life. Um, I walked into her room and it smelled like a dead rat. And I had lived with rats, so I knew what dead rats smelled like. It smelled like rot. And I approached her, and she said, uh, "My health is getting really bad." And she uncovered her chest, and one was completely black and rotted. And she said, "I think this is just a membrane." And she peels off a piece of her rotting flesh and hands it to me to inspect. And it took me 3 hours of begging her to get her to go to the hospital. Um, and of course, at that point, they said there was nothing they could do, and all they could do was to make her comfortable. So I spent my first year at CSUN, a mom to a newborn, providing hospice care to my dying foster mother. And that was a rough year.
Yeah, understatement for sure.
Um, and it was just kind of like one of those just buckle up and shut up moments where I took care of her, took care of my baby. I went to school, I went to work, and I just kind of like mechanically was going through things. I was helping my dad with the funeral arrangements and helping him arrange a trust for my brothers who were still autistic and adults. And I just kind of was in go mode. And I didn't realize that that was not healthy because it felt healthy to me because I was doing everything for everyone and being everything for everyone. And it wasn't until the beginning of this year that I experienced burnout. And I actually went to a mental health facility at the beginning of this year because I got to a point where none of my coping mechanisms were working because I was so burned out.
Yeah, it's a
And it's
very
like
real thing.
I was doing the things you were supposed to do. I was taking care of everyone. I was going to school. Hi, baby. I was going to work. I, bought my first home at 26, and I was taking care of my child, and I was being a super mom, and I was taking care of my sister, and everything was getting done, but I wasn't taking care of me.
Yeah.
And so I took 2 weeks in a mental health facility, and they gave me medication for my PTSD because they think that the loss of my foster mother and the way that happened triggered a lot of PTSD from my original childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So I learned the importance of not being everything for everyone and putting myself first.
And while everybody's story is obviously very, very different, you may very well be in a position right now where your experience with that and learning that can be very valuable to people. Is there a summary thought and or multiple thoughts relative to that when people think, "No, just keep going"? Like the importance of understanding self-care is critical. Having been through what you've been through, having gone through those 2 weeks of forcing yourself to stop and care for yourself and have others help care for you and get kind of your feet back under you from the burnout. What advice would you share to people who are worried about burnout, or people who think somebody they know might be completely in a similar situation where they're burned out? What kind of knowledge, I guess, have you gained that could, help other people? I'm trying to think of the best way to ask the question, and I'm failing. So, but you get the idea.
I think the perfect storm for burnout is, one, you're probably a perfectionist. You probably have a really great work ethic, because my parents gave me a really great work ethic with how they raised me. You probably have anxiety and a lot of people or things that you feel need to be taken care of and won't be taken care of properly unless you do it. So that's the perfect storm. If you add some trauma into that, whether it's grief, loss of a loved one, past abuse that you haven't yet dealt with, divorce, anything. If you add some trauma into that, that's the perfect storm for being burnt out, because you're going to take your first three and dial them to 11. And you're going to be all right for a while. You'll feel good. You're checking off all your boxes on your to-do list. You're doing everything for everyone. Everything's taken care of. It's all fine. It's all the way you want it to be. You'll be a little over controlling, but the people around you will understand because things are getting done. And then one day, you just will stop caring about everything. You'll feel almost apathetic. Like, if a car hops the curb right now, okay. And that's where I'd gotten to. I wasn't suicidal, but hey, somebody comes and takes me out, that's fine. I had lost all passion for my work. That was the first red flag for me. It was like, I have this great career job that I worked so hard for, and I don't even want to be here now. I had lost passion for being around the people I loved. It was like I just wanted to be alone. And those are your red flags. Why are these things that you worked so hard for, or that you have put so much time and energy into, suddenly not mattering to you? And that's when you need to say, I need to take a step back and take care of myself. And what I've learned from that is, delegate what you can. Not everything has to be perfect. Let some things go. It's okay if the dishes are in the sink for a couple of days. It's okay if you have your daughter clean the bathtub and it's not perfect. Like, you got to let some things go beyond your perfectionist range, and understand that if you do everything for everybody, you're going to make them dependent on you, so they're not doing things for themselves. And that's where I had gotten to. Like, my child and my husband were so used to me taking care of everything that I felt resentment that they weren't doing it, like going out of their way. Oh, hey, the dishes are in the sink, maybe I should do them. They were so used to me doing it that I had made them dependent upon me. And that was my fault. Instead of delegating and having them learn their own independence and self-sufficiency, I had made everyone dependent on me because I needed things to be perfect and I needed to be in control. And a lot of that was trauma driven. And if you feel that need to be in control all the time, you need to check your trauma, and you need to talk to somebody and seek out how to heal from that.
You're hitting home in a lot of ways. Including for myself. There's been a lot going on I'm sure for everybody in this 2020 crazy year. I'm sure there's more people feeling exactly what you just described than ever before, as far as, number of the population or percentage of the population feeling burnt out. Our family's gone through quite a bit. We currently are still actually going through quite a bit, which is why we've had this gap in our shows for the last month. But I appreciate that, because that's very valuable insight from somebody who's had to stop and recognize and heal and figure out what those triggers were. So if you start to see that again coming up, or start experiencing that again, how do you behave differently now?
I actually started experiencing it about a month ago. My father was kicked out of his home because the person he was renting from uh, claimed financial hardship due to COVID. And so we had 2 weeks to move all of his and my brother's things. And of course, a drastic change. One of my brothers suffered a mental break and decided to start being physically abusive to my father, who's now 73 years old. And I had to call a 5150 on him twice in a matter
I
of
don't know what
2 weeks.
that is. Sorry.
A 5150 is basically when you tell the police this person is a threat to themselves or others, and they hold them in a hospital for a 3-day review to monitor them and um, get them to cool their heels a bit, but also to see, what services and mental health help they can provide. Um, so I moved my sister into my home. She's living with me now, and I had to find alternate housing for my brothers and for my dad, and get together our whole band of friends to help move all of my dad's stuff, because my dad was a little bit of a hoarder. And that comes with being part of that depression era
Mm-hmm.
generation. Everything's useful. So for a while I was okay and I was doing everything for everyone. And then I started to get burnt out again. And I started to delegate more. And my brother would call on the phone. I'd be like, you know what? I don't have the spoons to talk to you right now. I don't have the mental reserves to talk to you right now. So I would ignore the call. You have to protect your own reserves of mental and emotional energy sometimes. And sometimes that means just taking that step back, delegating what you can, and letting the rest go. Because as long as somebody's not dying, you can let things go for a couple of days, and that's okay. And I took a few days to rest, and then I would make a to-do list and say, okay, today I'm just going to do a couple of these things. And, my brother at the time was calling every day, and I'd be like, I cannot talk to you every day. I will talk to you when I have something to update you on and when I can help. And I had to establish those boundaries, and I had to stay firm on those boundaries for my own mental health.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means establishing boundaries with the people you love that aren't necessarily what they want. And that's important, because you have to take care of you, or you can't take care of anyone else.
No, absolutely. That's really great advice. Um, wow. So you've brought us essentially to this year, and we know where your family's at. You have some extra news this year.
Yes. I'm working on my master's in engineering for my career, and around May, I discovered that I was pregnant with my second child. So,
Congratulations.
thank you. My husband and I, we've been together for 10, 11 years now. This is our second child, and we're all very excited.
Yeah. I only chuckle because it almost looked like in your face you were thinking, other than the upcoming workload that a newborn is bringing, we're all very excited.
Well, again, that was one of those, how much am I willing to stretch myself situations. And so with my sister coming to live with me, and me now being her primary care provider, with me schooling my child at home, with me being, the head of the household and the matriarch and taking care of everybody, I spoke with my work and I've told them, this is what's happening. And this is the support I need. And my HR basically told me, how about we have you go out on disability until you deliver, and then you go on your paid family leave. Because I knew that I was overworking myself again. And luckily, I have a very supportive company very great company that I will probably work for the rest of my life because I love them so much. And they said, "We care about you as an individual and as an employee, and here's how we can support you." So I've never felt like I couldn't go to them when I'm running up against something hard in my own life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you want to share who you work for?
Oh, I work for Rincon Consultants. They're an environmental consulting firm
Okay.
with planners, engineers, scientists, um, and they basically consult cities, counties, and private developers on um, what they need to do for development projects, hazardous waste mitigation, water infrastructure, etc., so that they can be compliant with both the California and federal guidelines for environmental policies.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it sounds like is that a privately held organization then? That's or are they a large corporation?
Yes,
Okay. So that
it's
certainly
about
helps. And
200 people.
it seems like I only ask because it seems like when organizations or corporations are still privately held, there tends to be more of a likelihood that they still have and or adhere to that model of really caring for their staff a lot more than sometimes big corporations who are constantly trying to answer to their shareholders as their primary concern start to lose some of that value
Yeah,
for their employees. So I was curious.
yeah.
That's awesome. Well,
I'm
what a
really
blessing.
happy.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. um okay, so if you found out in May, you're coming close.
Yes, I'm due at the end of January, and it's going to be another girl. So we're very excited.
That's awesome. Wow. So um whether we include this or not, it's totally up to you. But you mentioned that your sister still essentially operates almost with the mind of a like a 6 month old from when she incurred
Yes,
the trauma. How does that? I can't even wrap my brain around that. Like, how do you
it's
care for
not a
that?
lot of people know. Not a lot of people know how to interact with her. So I care for her the way I would an infant. I change her, I bathe her, I feed her. Um, we make sure that she gets enough calories throughout the day by giving her Ensure supplementally. Um, we have to stretch her limbs for her because she's not ambulatory, so she's not using them. Um, and like a baby, she has different cries for different things. She recognizes caregivers. She responds to textures and bright colors, which is why a lot of my art has textures and bright colors in it because I like her to experience it too. Um, I want her to be able to experience things like art and music, and she seems to enjoy those things.
Okay.
She even has musical preferences. Like if something is too sad, she'll start crying and tell us to change, like basically telling us to change it. Um, but it's like caring for an infant,
Yeah.
a very big infant.
Yeah. So does she respond in wonder to things? Like, you think of like if you take a baby on a walk, right?
Mhm.
Butterflies, birds, like their reactions are often like wondrous because they're exposed to it for the first time, partly. But obviously, she's
Mhm.
had exposure to things more than once, so you'd almost think part of that wonder is gone. But if the mindset is still at that stage, how does she react to, things of that nature?
Um, if it's something that's new, like last night I gave her raspberry pie for the first time, she'll stop and she'll get like this thinking face on her where she's trying to determine if she likes it or not. Whether it's a new sensation, a new taste, a new experience. She, do I like this? Is this okay? And then she'll respond in a way like a smile or in this case with food, yelling at me to give her more food, to let you know that she likes it. If she doesn't like it, she'll start fussing and I don't like this. Don't do it.
Yeah. Wow.
Um, So it's just being responsive to her cues and knowing what they are. And because I've grown up with her, I'm very familiar with it. The nurses in particular have had a hard time like figuring out what her cues are, but like the more they're around her, the more they understand what she means by certain noises.
Yeah.
Like I can tell the difference between like I'm frustrated cry or I'm in pain cry or I'm just bored.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Um, wow. Okay, so I'm going to touch it a little bit more on some of the things we've covered as far as retrospective, but you've brought us to today, and you're obviously very happy with the organization you work with right now. But paint us a picture when you think forward for your children, for your marriage, for yourself, for your profession, for your art. Um, what what gets you excited still? What are you looking forward to the future looking like, including what are some of the goals that you guys are pursuing? Um, Share a little bit of that.
Right now, I'm focused on growing my stability more, so the master's degree with engineering, um, because it's in my heart to eventually adopt kids and to give them the same chance that my foster parents gave me, but without all of the turmoil and the homelessness. Um, so I want to buy a house with a a large house with a large yard. I want to have chickens and I want to have a garden that I can garden in and I want to have enough bedrooms to like adopt several children and raise them and give them that chance and that mentorship and guidance that I received. Um, and that's kind of what it's like. I've reached all of my goals and I told myself I would be better than the people who hurt me and now I am. What's next is to give back to those who are coming after me, the kids who are suffering who've been in the same situation or worse situations, and to see how I can help them heal and help them succeed and become healthy adults who will be better than the people who hurt them. Um, and so that's kind of like my overarching goal is I'm going to be a good career woman and have a stable income, but I'm also going to be a good mom and adopt some kids. Um, but that's a long road.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I got a
absolutely.
few years.
It's exciting though, and tell us a little about your husband. Is what's he do? Is he does he have at all of similar past, or see? I was how did tell us a little bit about that love story?
He actually is the complete opposite. He grew up, with mom, dad, white picket fence. He was raised by his aunt, his mom, and his grandma. He calls them the Hydra, the three-headed beast, because they were always like keeping him on the straight and narrow. Um, he grew up with a mom who put a lot of time and effort into his self confidence and emotional stability and empathy and emotional intuitiveness, which in the end helped me a lot in developing my communication skills and how to be healthy in a relationship because I didn't know how to do that. Um, I was a traumatized, angry, resentful teenager when we met. um, and um, he's just been my rock. And his mom is the most loving, patient person I've ever met in my life. She taught me how to be a better mom when my own foster mother had just died. So I'm just really grateful for his family because they're like the epitome of what you think a family should be, like loving, supportive, stable. And I was just like, families like this exist? What?
Yeah.
I always tell him he doesn't appreciate his mom enough. I'm like you have the golden mother.
Well,
um,
I don't know this obviously, but um, I think he probably values a lot of you and your qualities that were instilled in you from your mom and your stepmom. That alpha, not alpha, but like that matriarchal Italian mom, and the very um, strict, powerful Catholic stepmother or foster mom. Sorry, messing up the titles, but if he had the Hydra, right? You kind of grew up
Yeah.
very similar, so he probably values a lot of that similarity in you, truly too. So, um, that's pretty awesome though. And like you said, you guys are very complementary in how you
Yeah.
benefit each other in that way.
He's more of the nurturer and I'm more of the provider, and he balances me out. He tells me when I need to slow down, and I tell him when he needs to push himself more. Right now, he's security for a mental health hospital, and he's working on being a chiropractor.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
we're both just working on having a more stable um, life and giving our child uh, a structured but more stable life than what I went through.
Yeah.
Um, and just being good people, and especially in a society right now where good people are in short supply.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly it makes you wonder. I'll say that, right? I mean, I guess I'm fortunate enough that we hear about and we know about a lot of these latent treasures, right? Like yourself, that don't certainly, whether they're in short supply or not, maybe I don't have a conclusion on, but I do know that they certainly aren't being given enough. Um, they're not being highlighted enough to give other people one like the hero in the books you love to read and be inspired by. They're not being highlighted enough to inspire others to be their own hero. And it's crazy to me that our society has gone so dark, and people would rather listen to bad news than good news, and that's why good news doesn't make it to constant production on air, because they can't sell advertising because people don't want to tune into bad news or good news. They want to hear bad news. That doesn't make sense to me. Um,
Doesn't make sense at all.
but yeah, so I pray that there are lots of heroes like yourself and great stories out there like yourself. And we're so grateful that you obviously took the time to come on and share, and be open with us, because you have so much insight to share. And your story is obviously very unique too, especially with your sister and your foster brothers, or I'm just going to call them your brothers, frankly. Um, and and how it's molded you, how you've still come out of it the way you've come out of it. Thankfully, for a lot of the people that were blessed to be part of your life and helping shape you. When you look back, um, I don't. Do you get people coming to you often asking for your input relative to the foster care community, relative to how you communicate or would communicate to people, contemplating involvement, to people who are in it but are maybe getting burnt out, what they should do? Do you have conversations like that a lot?
Well, I still work pretty closely with women of substance and men of honor, so I work a lot with the youth and with some people who like want to volunteer, but they aren't really sure how. Um, and the first thing I say is it's okay to not be a constant volunteer because you can get a lot of secondary trauma listening to the stories of some of these individuals. So I'll volunteer for a little bit and I'll be all right, and then I'll have to take a step back because it gets emotionally too much for me. And my mentor Rosalinda knows this, and she knows that like whether you're a social worker, a police officer, a volunteer, when you're working around traumatized people, it can leave you traumatized, and you need to take that step back to heal every once in a while. You don't have to constantly be at it to make a difference. Um, and for people who want to volunteer and be involved with foster youth, I always say that you don't always have to be a foster parent. You don't always have to adopt kids. Sometimes just having that role model. I mean, for me, the role models that I had made the biggest difference because they gave me qualities that I wanted to emulate. They gave me stability to a person I could go to when I was not stable, or I was thinking about a decision and I didn't know what decision to make, like whether or not I should have my baby. Um, and just having that support system, that extended support system, is really helpful to a lot of the youth going through the system and transitioning out of it.
Yeah.
Um, and it gives us people to aspire to. Like I I I want to be as driven as Rosalinda. I want to be as patient and supportive as my mother-in-law. And it's a lot of the kids in the system don't have that support system. They don't have those people to inspire them to be better. And that's what you want. You want them to have that extended network, because it does take a village to raise a child, no matter what age they're at. And the youth that are in the system are children. And they're often children who have been through extreme abuse and trauma, who have seen some shit, excuse my language, um, and really need that hope rekindled in them, that good people do exist in the world, and that they do not have to repeat the cycle of the people who have hurt them. They can be better than them. Um, so even if it's just mentoring, or if it's just uh, job resources, or taking them out to buy interview clothes, or education resources, or starting a scholarship for foster youth, or you know, getting hygiene bags together. We have one of our youth, in Women of Substance, Men of Honor, does something called the Skid Row Project, and it's where every year he gathers grants and donations. He buys backpacks, fills them with hygiene products and non-perishables, and he goes out to Skid Row in LA and gives them out to the kids on Skid Row. And sits and has coffee or hot chocolate with them and talks to them, and rekindles that hope for them. Um, and that's his way of giving back. He doesn't want to be a mentor because he's still working through his own trauma, but he's giving back in his own way, and that's important too.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like any way that we give towards helping our communities doesn't have to be done a specific way. You can find something that works for you as an individual on giving back to your community and your society, and make it work.
Yeah. I like that. That's good. How has this, and I don't know if there was any even involved, I'm assuming there probably was, but um, what shaping was there, if any, as you grew up, faith wise, and or where have you where do you stand in your faith currently, if any? And there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious. People who've gone through so much, um, often have some of the most interesting perspectives on these spiritual questions or concepts. Just curious what yours is.
That's a little bit of a story, actually. Um, so both my foster parents were Catholics, and I grew up, heavily entrenched in the Catholic Church, and I even went to Catholic school for a year. Um, but around the time that Pope John Paul II died, and we got our new pope, all of these sexual abuse cases came to light. Uh, Under the church. And it was revealed that instead of giving the victims justice, the archdiocese was just moving these priests around to new victims. And I felt so betrayed by that as a person who had gone through abuse, um, that I could no longer follow the Catholic Church because I couldn't follow a house that didn't practice what it preached. And it was really a turning point for me. I turned away from the church before I turned away from God, is what I tell people. It wasn't until I lost my foster mother, and I had prayed for a miracle, because this woman was a force of nature, and I couldn't imagine her not overcoming it. Um, that I turned away from God because I blamed him for not saving her. And it took me until 2 years ago. Um, I had been doing a study group with a woman named Keisha, who was going for her doctorate, and we were studying chemistry together. And we connected on the fact that like we both kind of struggled with like we believed that there was a God, but we struggled with our faith. Um, and she offered to bring me to her church. She went to a Baptist church, and I had stepped inside a church since my mother died, but I agreed. I was like, you know what could happen? And I went to church with her that Sunday, and the very first woman I met looked just like my foster mother. And it felt like everywhere I was going, I was seeing hints of my mom, and I just started bawling because I knew it was her welcoming me home. And so I continue to go to that church this day. Um, I sing for the choir. I've been baptized for them, but it was very powerful that first time that I went there. And I remember at one point within the service, because the service is a couple of hours long, I was really trying to just tune into to what was happening, and the choir was singing and the preacher was preaching, and noise got so loud. And I remember just feeling like a vessel in my chest had been broken open and filled with water. And I'd never felt that before. I'd prayed and it felt like I was praying in the air. I had, tried to connect spiritually and had never experienced anything. And so that just kind of left me questioning as to whether God existed. Um, but everything I experienced that day was letting me know that I needed to be there, and that um, He was welcoming me home. It was a very powerful moment.
Yeah, tremendous. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. That those kinds of experiences and stories, and I don't know. Sometimes I like the word testimony, sometimes I don't. But it's just those stories of connection, and those times where you're experiencing something more than just being in, whatever place the place might be. I love those, so I appreciate that. And I had I guess nobody listening knew that we talked a little bit before we started recording, but we hadn't had a chance to talk about that. That's really powerful and amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So, wow, that's really cool. So I have no doubt that your future looks pretty crazy bright. Do you have any thoughts on what you're going to keep doing with your art hobby, quote unquote? Because I know you're so talented, and I know it's not a career pursuit, but I'm sure it's something you'll continue to do for all the joy it's bringing you and your sister, and I'm sure the rest of your circle too. But is there any special news on that side, or?
Previously, I had used my art as a way to delve into my trauma and to heal from it. So a lot of the pieces you'll notice deal with like a lot of highly emotional or sometimes dark material, like self-isolation, self-worth, grief, um, loss, etc. And even though they have some bright colors and textures, there's a lot of symbolism there. Um, Lately, I've been this year, especially with everybody being so affected by the pandemic, affected by the stress and the depression of isolation, I've been focusing more on creating art of what makes me happy. And it's like the simple little things in life that will make you happy, like sunshine and clean water, and just looking at nature and lemon trees and koi fish. And I'm looking at just calming, happy imagery and recreating that in a way that can extend that calm and happiness to people's living spaces and to their own space, especially with everyone cooped up in their homes right now. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
working on several pieces right now.
Very cool. So I know we always post all your info in our show notes, and I'm going to continue to do that, but For anybody who's not going to take the time to go look at our show notes, if you want to just verbally share, where can people find more about you, whether that be your professional self as a person working on their master's in engineering, if you have a LinkedIn page or your store for your art, where can people find you?
I have for my art, I have an Etsy, and I also post my art on Instagram. It's called Pascolio Paintings, PASCOOLEO Paintings. And then professionally, I do have a LinkedIn. It's just Cheyenne Summers.
Awesome.
And yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah. Well, your art is very well done. You can sense the emotion, when you getting to, I call it stare. So observe it with, for me, it takes being kind of just in a calm space to just observe and feel essentially what's conveyed. If I'm just glancing quickly in the middle of 5 other things in my head, I get nothing from looking at art. But when I slow down, I sense a lot more from art, and I certainly like your pieces. So at any rate, I don't want to necessarily close out without asking if there's anything that you think would be really valuable that people listening in might want to hear, that I don't even know to ask. I like, to a degree, this catch-all question. Is there anything that you think we should cover that I haven't talked about?
We could close out with one of my poems.
That'd be great.
I think
okay.
One of them is apt. So let me pull them out here. Sorry, I wasn't prepared for this, but
that's all right. Either was I.
This is called Creating Change. And for those of you who don't know, in addition to making visual art, I also write a lot of poetry about my experiences. And I'm working on editing it and publishing it, but I have over 500 poems right now.
Wow.
And this is one of them.
And so I'm assuming you're going to now are a bulk or just a kind of a select few of these 500 going to eventually be published, or?
I'm still working with my editor on it to see what flows best, and it might be more than one book.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I really wanted to give people an insight as to like the emotional depth there. So this is one called Creating Change. It all seems too big, too loud, too much. The problems of the world, numerous and overwhelming. You feel too small, too helpless, too weak. What can we possibly do to change the tides? There are too many, too complex, too widespread. It is in our actions that our salvation resides. The little things, the little ways, the everyday of what we do to follow through. Little steps turn into big steps, turn into world-changing steps. So make sure that you are stepping in the right direction. That's it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you. And very, very fitting. Even your last 2-3 lines. Everyone that we have talked with talks about the importance of action, right? And what a fitting close, little steps turn into bigger steps, turn into world-changing change. But that's that's awesome. And it's never been, it was weird. I never noticed it until probably the 5th or 6th show. I'm like, all these people have the same underlying current, essentially. Very, very different stories and topics and everything, but just this idea of do something. And in our consumer lifestyle of social media, TV, radio, like everything, we like to absorb, and it boggles my mind that there's so many people not taking action, right? Who have these ideas like, oh, I'd like to do that. Well, then do it or start or
Mm-hmm.
just go, do something, be, right? Instead of being an observer, be in the story, right? And I
Yeah.
I pick on American Idol, um, and I know it's entertaining, but I'm like, why do so many people like get addicted to shows like that instead of going out and like do something like that yourself? Like go pursue something, right? Because we're being inspired by it, but nobody's taking action afterwards. It's
Mm-hmm.
mind-boggling. So thank you for that. It's very cool, and thank you overall for all your time today, and for you being willing to share your art with us in the first place. I definitely want to stay in touch more as your baby comes and as we hear more about graduation. So many cool things on the horizon for you. So
Thank you.
I'm excited for you. I'm incredibly impressed, and thank God that you are where you are and who you are right now after all you've been through. That's just miracle after miracle getting you through. And I know most days it probably feels like could use another one. But no, hopefully things are good for you because you deserve some blessing, and even more than the blessings that you've gotten to get where you're at. You're an incredible person, so thank you for sharing your story with us.
Of course. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Yep. All right.
All right, bye.
Have a good one.
You too.